the theme of this panel session. It's all about a guy called Buckminster Fuller, who's been a great source of inspiration to many of us from the older generation of change makers. And that's why we would love to introduce him to you, who are the next generation of change makers. So Buckminster Fuller was an architect, futurist, inventor. He was way ahead of his time. He had some pretty amazing ideas about how you could build cars and houses, and he even invented something called a world game, which is a little bit about what we're creating here with all these pop-ups around the world. But we'll get back to that. Maybe we can get the first little movie, because we have like a 3-minute introduction that introduces Buckminster Fuller, our guest of honor at this session. And if Tudor can make it play, I think we should have a little movie coming up here. Maybe we start with a quote, Tudor, or what's the... Yeah, so let's have a look at the quote. This quote that we will have on the screen in a minute was when Bucky, it was way back in the 60s, long before any of you were born. Buckminster Fuller, who was actually named as the Leonardo da Vinci of our time, he came up with this wildly ambitious idea to create a game with the purpose of making the world work for all of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous collaboration or cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. So for some of you, it sounds a little bit familiar because Kate Raworth, who's one of our, what could you call it, developers of this new education called a Master in Regenerative Action, she came up with an abbreviation of this quote where she says, how can we meet the needs of all within the means of the planet? So Kate was also inspired by Bucky's vision of really engaging a critical mass of people across the planet so that we could really create the change that we would like to see in the world. So to honor Buckminster Fuller, I'd love for us to screen a little, it's only 3 minutes. I mean, it could have been 3 hours. 3 minutes briefly introducing Buckminster Fuller. So let's see if we can make it play. It's always with technology a challenge, but here he is.
Richard Buckminster Fuller was one of the most famous designers and inventors in the 20th century, who had a particular interest towards improving society with his many inventions and ideas. Spanning more than 5 decades, he developed solutions to human problems in designing technologies that do more with less. During his many years working with machinery, Fuller used his comprehensive problem-solving approach to constructing a modular home that was relatively inexpensive and easy to mass-produce on a large scale for the general population. This was called the Dymaxion house. Fuller was ahead of the curve in understanding during his time that efficiencies must be created in how we develop new technologies in order to prevent a scarcity of resources and limiting negative impacts on the environment. This sustainable way of thinking that Fuller adopted in all of his design work went on to being applied to many other technologies, such as the Dymaxion car, which was a streamlined, free-wheeled vehicle that could make extraordinarily sharp turns, a compact, prefabricated, easily installed Dymaxion bathroom, and Dymaxion deployment units, which were mass-produced houses based on circular grain bins. While Dymaxion deployment units never became popular for civilian housing, they were used during World War II to shelter radar crews in remote locations with severe climates. In the middle of Fuller's life work, Fuller designed and developed one of the most significant constructions he is most well known for, the geodesic dome. This was a lightweight, cost-effective and easy to assemble dome structure, which enclosed more space without intrusive supporting columns that other structures bear. The geodesic dome efficiently distributed stress within the structure, thereby becoming a very strong design with the ability to withstand harsh environments. From this point onwards, Fuller gained a lot of understandings from nature by looking at how nature's geometrical patterns can be applied to the design of structures within human society, and by doing so could create huge advantages and possibilities. Today there are more than 300,000 geodesic domes around the world, ranging from shelters in California and Africa to radar stations in remote locations, as well as geodesic structures on countless children's playgrounds. In the early 1950s, Fuller concentrated lecturing on the benefits of a systems approach to problem solving. He coined the now familiar phrase "spaceship Earth" to describe the integral nature of Earth's living system. Beginning in the late 1960s, Fuller was especially involved in creating World Game, a large-scale simulation and series of workshops he designed that used a large-scale Dymaxion map to help humanity better understand, benefit from, and more efficiently utilize the world's resources. Fuller's philosophy could be best summarized as being a social thinker, believing that humanity's survival is contingent upon how it manages spaceship Earth and the resources it contains, and that creating abundance whilst doing little to no harm to the environment would help to alleviate a lot of the problems seen in the world today. His emphasis on a systems thinking approach shaped a way of thinking that adopted the idea that the world is an interconnected system with interconnected problems, and that a way to solve these problems would be to call upon collective action.
Loud. That was. It will work. It works. Oh, I won't shout then. It was Buckminster Fuller, and his nickname was Bucky. His friends called him Bucky, and now we all call him Bucky. So Bucky built this geodesic structure that some of you students I know are familiar with now, because actually you've been working on building domes for a couple of hours today and yesterday. So Jan, could you step up with some of your students to present what you've been doing? And you get the mic here.
Yeah, we built a globe. It's 2 geodesic domes put together out there. The door is too small, so you have to look it out there. As a model, this is actually a combination of Da Vinci and Buckminster Fuller. Acrobats, please. To understand what's happening in a dome, why it works, why we can do more with less, why we can do lightweight structures for housing, we worked a little bit with acrobatics, and we'll show you. Okay, a horse, please. Yeah, can you do it on stage? Yeah, on stage, okay. And go back one. Wait. Yes. The very important thing in this is use the power best. So sit down. Yep. These are very strong acrobats. So yeah. And a triangle is a very strong construction. There's some pulling, there's some pushing. We worked on that. We'll show you. Okay, go ahead. And slowly, and wait, straight up, and lift this arm, let go. Slowly, hold it. See if you can find the triangles in this construction. It's made of muscles and bones, and it works. Big applause, thank you. Oh yeah. One more.
Oh, one more, okay. Oh, wow.
And some more acrobats for the big pyramids, please. Run. Yeah, the group from today, we need 5 persons to make the bottom. Get ready. Yeah, down there. Yes. Stand up. We do this one.
Amazing, Jan. Thank you. So that was a live body demonstration of the power of this geodesic structure, right? And now I'd like to introduce to you the panelists of today. And this is actually a mixed reality setup. So we are operating in two different dimensions, maybe more, who knows? We'll get to that later. But Rakta, if you could stand up for a minute. This is Rakta El Halawi. You better pronounce it yourself.
El Halawani.
El Halaweni from Egypt, Cairo, Egypt. Rakta is also one of the initiators of MasterPeace, a front runner in this global movement of young change makers across the planet. I think you have now in 42 countries or 45? 45 countries. And yeah, so let's give that a big hand, 45 countries. And maybe Ragnar, just briefly, you could share what's happening right now out there in the world.
Yeah, so basically we started the youth assembly last year with an invitation that this year that more than 120 peace pop-ups. So a simulation of what we have right now in the youth island, but in 120 locations around the world that youngsters and young change makers come together and have discussions, dialogue, performances, and come up with actionable commitment. And I stopped counting this morning because it's really exploding. I think we have more than 200, and if you see them on the map, they look amazing. You know, keep popping up in every location. And the idea to have for next year an invitation for heads of states, global decision makers to come together with the young change leaders and change makers on the same table and have discuss what we want to have as a future of the world, but youngsters being part of the decision making. So that's in brief.
Final word. Yeah. And to my right is Anja C. Anderson. Anja is an astrophysicist from the famous Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. So Anja, just very briefly, what kind of work are you doing in there?
So I'm an expert on cosmic dust. So I try to understand how dust form, and fullerenes, as we call them, Buckminster fullets, this kind of structure is actually part of the things that we see in space. So I'll talk more about that later.
Wait, so it's all connected in some way. And yeah, let's give a hand for Anja as well. And thank you for coming, Anja. And then in our Zoom room, because we also have a Zoom room, we have two amazing futurists. On the upper left corner is David Hull. Is that correctly pronounced? Yes, David
It
Hull.
is, rhymes with cool.
Hull sounds cool. But David is a futurist, and he's been working also in filmmaking, actually. And he's a writer, and he's also an activist in his own field, because he's inspired by Bucky, created something called This Spaceship Earth. And last time I counted, I think there was 140,000 people that joined this network of astronauts focusing on how do we actually operate this spaceship Earth of ours. David, you'll get to speak more a little bit later about this initiative, but I'll just turn to Gerd Leonard. You're in Switzerland, right, Gerd? Yeah.
Yes, greetings. I'm in Zurich.
In Zurich. And Gerd is also a futurist and an author and a filmmaker who actually very recently, I think it's, like a few weeks ago, completed the editing of a short film, one of many that Gerd has produced, but this is the latest. And it's a film about the good future that we all could have, and also presenting some of the trends that will form our future, and also maybe decide how everything is going to go. So I think before leaving the floor to you to explain more about the Fork in the Road project, let's have a look at Gerd's film, The Good Future.
Are you excited about the future or are you worried? Are you expecting good things or more misery? These days it seems like all around us the future is getting bleaker and bleaker. Netflix and Hollywood are telling us about dystopian scenarios. The news are showing more reels of climate change disasters, economic issues, clueless CEOs and politicians, and of course, in the end, the robots will take our jobs and then they're going to harvest our bodies for energy. But despite all of that noise, I am here to tell you that the future is better than we think. I believe that human ingenuity, our science and technology, can and will solve most of our long-standing problems. I also believe that human kindness and the ability to collaborate will prevail. But we're running out of time because the future is arriving faster than we think. Actually, the future is already here, we just haven't paid enough attention. Science fiction is becoming science fact, and we are at a fork in the road. The next 10 years will bring more change than the previous 100 years. We must make the right decisions now if we want a good future. What is currently wrong is that what we've done for the last 100 years is no longer going to be suitable for the future. We've had a certain logic that has allowed us to prosper, but we've come to the top of the ceiling. We've had crisis after crisis after crisis and many issues that we're not solving. The current system is unfit for the future. In a way, you could say capitalism is unfit for the future. In the future, we're going to need to think wider, to think beyond profit and growth, to think about people, planet, purpose, and prosperity. We need a different logic so that our future can be good and can be developed for all of us. We have a chance now to get it right for our foreseeable future, or to let it go and end up in a bad place. So we're now at that point to where things that were science fiction are becoming very real, becoming science fact. Whether that's about language translation or robots or artificial intelligence. And that makes a big difference. Because now in technology, the question is no longer if we can do something or when or how, but why do we do something? And what do we want from it? So in just 10 years, we're going to be at an entirely different point of our lives where it's not about deciding if technology works, but what technology do we want? And is it going to be good for us? But before we talk about building the good future and creating the good future for us, we have to define what good is, what it means for you, what it means for us, what it means for our society. You know, in many ways, I think in our society it has been brought down to the definition of good being very simple, which means prospering and having things and having more things. And now we're finding out, I think, right now at this very moment, that we need a little bit more than that. We have to have a wider definition. So it's about other people, it's about relationships, experiences. Then it's about the planet. If we can maintain the Earth as it is going forward, it's about purpose, which means having a sense of what you are living for. And then finally, it's about prosperity, not just about profit. Right? It's a much wider definition. Let's have a look at some examples about how the good future could manifest itself. Imagine if you could eat meat without harming animals. I mean, I eat meat, but I do think that the future of food will be vegetarian. Some 30% of the world's global pollution comes from agriculture, farming, and livestock, and there's just no way that we can feed an eventual 12 billion people in this way. Fortunately, we are already inventing our future with vertical farming, with plant-based meat, with meat from the lab, so we can solve this problem. The good future of food is sustainable, healthy, and affordable for everyone. Imagine if we can solve the world's energy problem. You know, I often feel really strange about how much energy I use, especially considering that I fly around the world to give speeches about the future. 75% of our current energy supply comes from oil, gas, and coal, and this is an existential threat to our future. Yet at the same time, we know that we have solutions like solar and wind turbines and renewable energies and of course next generation nuclear. So here's the question. We will have all the right technology, but will we have the will? Imagine if education isn't just about downloading information. When I went to university and music school, this is what I did. I downloaded things for later. But this will clearly not work in the future. There is too much information available, and after all, this is what machines do. They download information for later use and understanding. If you have kids, you have to think about this. Our kids have to learn how to do things machines can't do. The good future of education is going to be about lifelong learning on demand in all formats and at very low cost. Imagine if most of our routines can be done by smart software or machines. Imagine if work is no longer the center and purpose of our lives. I tried for a long time to use technology to work less, and it hasn't worked out. But this is what the future holds. Technology will allow us to move up the food chain, leave routines behind, and use intelligent machines to be faster and more efficient. If you work like a robot will take your job. In the good future of work, our ultimate job is to be human. Imagine if healthcare wasn't just about treating sick people, but actually keeping us healthy. You know, when I go to the doctor these days, I get a medication and that's the end of the story. We can do so much better. Technology can help us to use data to become intelligent, connected, holistic, and to think about food and lifestyle to go with our healthcare. When we look at the future of healthcare, it's going to be about being connected, customized, personalized, and affordable, about real healthcare, not just sick care. Clearly, we are now in a situation where we're realizing our old paradigm of profit and growth is ending, and business as usual is dead. Capitalism as we know it is unfit for this future. Now we have to design a new future based on a wider sense of goals. So what can business leaders and politicians do to create a good future? First, the stock markets have to embrace this idea of a wider target, of a wider goal of things that we want to accomplish. And every company has to be rated on performance on 4 issues, not just one issue: people, planet, purpose, and prosperity. Second, the story of the future has to be told by the people, the creatives, the society, all of us together, not just by technology companies who are inventing the future so that they can sell it to us. The third one is we need every politician and public official to have kind of a driver's license for a future, to understand it, to plan for it, to be ready for it, to lead us into a great future. They need to be authorized and taught and have a license to run us into that future. Fourth, we need a council of the wise people. Think of ancient Greece, Socrates and others, that talked about how we could exist in a new world. We need people like that to come together and tell us what are the options, which way is the best to do, and what goes beyond economics and helps us to go to the further human future. But it's not just up to the politicians and public officials to create a good future, it's also up to us. So what can I do and what can we do together to create that good future? First, we have to believe it's possible that we have a good future, because as we believe, so we'll become. And then the good future has to be a priority for us. We have to spend the time on understanding it. We have to learn, we have to study, we have to spend 1 hour a day in the future to help create it. I have to develop what I call the future-ready mindset. And then we have to make choices. Don't give your data to companies that will abuse it. Don't do business with those that will not create a good future. Don't buy stock from companies that will not create a good future. And finally, if we want a good future, we have to be good. The good future is entirely possible and it's our choice. The only question is, are you going to be part of it?
Sound. Oh, now it's there. But you could read my lips as I was saying, good work, well done, right? Congratulations on the film. I'd love to hand over the word to you now, Gert, to explain a little bit about how this Fork in the Road project came together as kind of inspired by Buckminster Fuller, and maybe share a little bit what's the Fork in the Road project all about. So over to Gert.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I hope you enjoyed my movie. The good future was a topic that came out of a long conversation that I've had with other fellow futurists, including David Ewell and Glenn Heemstra and many others over the last, I don't know, 200 years. Now we're not that old, but over the last decade. And part of that discussion was riffing off Bucky's theme, where he says we are to be architects of our future, not its victims. So, and this has particularly been important in the COVID crisis, because many of us feel very stressed out and kind of like we can't do anything, you know? So the future is just happening to us, it's just falling down on us, and all we can do is take it or leave it, you know? And that really has to change, because in the end, you know, we are at a crucial moment in humanity. That's why it's called the fork in the road. And it's not just one moment, it is basically the moment, you know? The next 10 years will decide our future. So if we take action on climate change, we may be able to come around the bend. If we take action on artificial intelligence and on artificial general intelligence, we may be able to coexist with them. If we take action on genetic engineering, maybe we can solve cancer but not have super soldiers. So we are essentially at that point to where decision making is most important. And that decision making will not just happen in business, it will happen in society and politics. And that's why policy is so important. So that fork in the road moment right now, the next 10 years, everything has got to happen now, which means it's urgent, but there's hope. And that is the key message of my film. We can actually do something about the good future. There's hope, and we can collaborate. And gladly, I found a collaborator like David Yule here to work with me on the project. So this is essentially a call for everybody to get together and say it's time for real action now on the most important issues in humanity. Maybe David can chime in here at this point.
I know. Basically, we have until 2030, which is why it's so important that we speak to people such as yourself and at your age, because it will fall into your shoulders to guide us into the future. And the Fork in the Road project really is not anything redundant to what already exists. There's a lot of great projects out there concerned about the future. But as Gerd said, we really have just 10 years. So we have this choice. And I was profoundly affected by Fuller's book, Utopia or Oblivion, The Future of Humanity. And that's what really came up as Gerd was saying. We have this fork in the road to the good future or to continue on the path we're on. Actually, we're kind of past the fork in the road. We're already in the path down to catastrophe and kind of mindless, ignorant results. So we have to get a detour to get back on to the good future. So it is really incumbent on anybody under the age of 30 to step up and to realize that you need to lead with urgency. You need to be impatient. You need to understand one of the concepts that I've talked about in the shift age was the collapse of legacy thinking. Think of the fact that most of you are of the 21st century, and yet most of the thinking that exists, which therefore leads to the reality we live in, because thought precedes action, is from the 20th. So the collapse of 20th century thinking is what really has to happen. And it is generations such as yourself, and again, perhaps even your older brothers and sisters, who are not tied to the past. And it is the past that has got us to this critical point. Gerd, back to you.
So thanks a lot. And give them a big hand, please, for being out there for us. It's popular to be a futurist, apparently. So there's also the website. You can go in and have a look at forkintheroad.com, I think it is. And
Forkintheroadproject.com.
forkintheroadproject.com. And there's also kind of a manifesto there you can read and sign if you feel like supporting this initiative. Now, I'd love to hand over the microphone to our next guest, Anja, that you just was presented to from the Niels Bohr Institute, astrophysicist. You don't look like one though, Anja, but maybe that's me being sort of, prejudiced.
Yeah, maybe part of the future is not to be prejudiced about what people should look like when they have different jobs. So I'm gonna tell you a bit about, so the tools that we need to build the future that we want is actually partly the tools of science. And in order to understand the tools, we have to study the world around us, be it nature. We get very inspired by studying nature. And being an astrophysicist, what I study is the universe. So I look out into the universe. And in order to try to understand the universe, we actually get to understand ourselves. And we get a lot of tools in our toolbox that we can use to make life better on Earth. So my field of specialty is cosmic dust. So I try to understand how little specks of dust are formed in the universe. And in that quest for understanding dust particles, and you might be thinking, how can you end up being obsessed with dust? Because that sounds sort of a bit sad, right? That being a sort of a dust bunny fetish kind of thing. But the reason that dust particles, and especially cosmic dust particles, are so exciting is because it's out of these little dust particles that we make planets. And it's also on the surface of dust particles that we make molecules. So the molecules from which life is created and we all formed are actually related to the dust. So in the quest for understanding what dust is, we also try to look at where dust come from. So if you change to the next slide, you can see that the level of understanding we are at now is that dust is actually formed in connection with stars. So when stars like the sun get to their end stages, then if it's a small star, it ends as what we call a planetary nebula. And if it's a high mass star, it explodes as a supernova. And maybe the most important things about stars is that when they shine because they produce energy, and they produce energy by transforming one element to another element. So it's actually inside the stars that we form all the elements that we find on Earth today. So of the 118 elements in the periodic tables, basically only 2 of them were there from the beginning, which is hydrogen and helium, and everything else was generated inside the stars. So we are basically made of stardust. We are made of the elements which were created inside the stars. One of the elements that I am mostly intrigued about is carbon, because carbon is what we are built of as human beings, and carbon has some extremely interesting properties. So on this slide, which at first seems very complicated, it just shows you all the very, very different structures that you can build when you put carbon atoms together. And one of the structures is the fullerenes that we see out to the right in the middle, which is also called a bucket ball. And that is 60 carbon atoms sitting in sort of a very harmonic, perfect structure, because when 60 carbon atoms sit like that in a completely sphere, they are at a low energy level. And you can say that one of the things that we learn from nature is that nature is actually always trying to achieve some sort of equilibrium at the lowest possible energy level, because that's the best place to be. So if we go to the next slide, then we're zooming in on my 3 favorite types of carbon, which shows the magic of carbon. So what you see here, what the little purple balls, they're all carbon atoms. And then what you see to the left is graphite. Graphite is completely black. It's what you use in when you do your barbecue, for instance, or you have in your pencil when you want to write. So it's very black, it's very non-transparent, it's very soft as a material. If you put your carbon atom at a slightly different bonding, then you get diamond, and diamond is the hardest material in the universe. It's completely transparent, and it's very, very tough. And it's the same atoms. You just put them together in a different way. And then there's the fullerenes, which is again the same manifest of carbon. And I am also somehow a manifest of carbon, because all life as we know it on Earth is built up of long, wonderful carbon chains. And I think that's the magic somehow, that you have the same material which has very many forms of expression and can do very many things. And I think maybe the movie we just saw, that is also what the movie is presenting. We have a future, and we have very many different possibilities of making that future happen. We are sort of shaping the future as we walk along. And whether we want the future to be more black and soft like graphite, or transparent and hard like diamond, or maybe more harmonic like a fullerene, that is basically up to us who are here today. At the end, I'll show you a slide that I really like. So what you see here is on the left. So both of these pictures are computer generations of how we currently understand the world around us. So the purple slide is actually all the little bright dots, the yellow dots and the sort of purple dots are galaxies, and each galaxy consists of 200 million stars. So a little dot is 200 million stars, and where you have sort of the bright dots, the very shiny dots, that's actually where you have a lot of galaxies clumped together. And what is so strange when we look at what we call the large-scale structure of the universe, which is the way that the galaxy have decided to distribute themselves in the universe, then is that they like to be in some places, and then there's some places in space where they are not. So you have sort of these dark patches where there seem to be no galaxies, and we're trying to understand what is going on in these parts of space since the galaxies are not there. The image to the lower right is actually also a computer simulation of how we imagine that neurons in the brain are connected somehow. And what I like about these 2 images is, one, neurons in the brains are very, very tiny. Galaxies out in the universe are very, very large, but the structure that we see sort of mimic each other. You have sort of places where lots of things are going on, and you have places where there seems to be nothing happening. And maybe nothing is happening, or maybe the places where nothing is happening is just as important as the places where things are happening. So the next slide shows us something else, and I'll pass on the microphone to you.
Well, I didn't know that physics could be that cool, so maybe I should have specialized in that at school. So, you know what else is made also of stardust is all of us, and especially it's really crystallized in change makers. Yeah, I work with them every day for the past 10 years, and I know a lot of you in the rooms are also, all of you are actually change makers, so you're also stardust. But mimicking the neural networks in the brain and the galaxy is actually, this is connectivity through the internet. So this is how the internet is also structured, and maybe you can see also some similarities with the networks of the two before. And this is how we imagine also the peace pop-ups around the world. So they are literally these smaller molecules that are connected to each other through this complex yet made from the same network. And this is actually the magic in the universe and the magic in us, but also the magic of our connectivity. And talking about the bonds from the graphite to the diamonds makes us really reflect on our connection to each other on that level. We could be graphite, it's not a bad thing per se, but we also through that connections could be diamonds and turn something, a project or an idea or a concept, or also our interaction into diamonds. And this is talks about a brighter future. Fellow other panelists as well, joining from the virtual space. We're aiming next year to have a virtual reality actually simulation of this meeting as well. So we were trying to create the youth island into a virtual space where we could step in and out, but invite change makers around the world to also step in with their own avatar and join this crazy complex network, but on a very, very different scale as well for next year.
Yeah. So seeing this, it's almost like Bucky's vision of creating a world game is coming true, right? He envisioned that he would be able, or we would be able to connect enough students across the planet and enough people, change makers, to actually have impact on the decision making that are on the level of heads of states. As Bucky said, they're not going to figure it out. They're too busy defending their own territories and interests. But if we collaborate across borders, across cultures, and across disciplines, maybe we could create a world game that has the potential to change the game for all of us. With this, I would love to leave a little bit of time and space. We have a timekeeper, Anne-Marie, still a little bit of time for cues, questions, and answers from the panel. And so how we open that, Tudor? So I just stay here. The mic. Okay, so. So I will run around then with this mic, and if the wire is too short, you come up to me and you voice your questions, right? Because we want to hear the questions as well as the answers. So anyone sitting with a question or a comment? I saw, David, you were raising your hand before because you actually had something to say, right? That you'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to talk a little bit about this spaceship Earth and urge all of you that you really should try to read. He's a very dense writer, both Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth and Utopia Oblivion. He put these two books out in a period of 2 years. So I just want to suggest to you why he has totally shaped my thinking in some degree. Gerd. When I read the book Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, I took in two major concepts that I think at the foundation of what we're doing here today. Number one, think of Earth as a spaceship. It's not getting resupplied. It's the only place we have. And it is this insight that I read this book right around Earth Day 1 in 1970, and it transformed the way I look at the planet. In other words, you were talking about cross borders. I put up a map when I do a presentation of the world that shows all the nations. And I ask people what that is. And they say, it's the map of the world. And I go, no. And then I show a picture of Earth. And I go, this is Earth. What the map of the nations are is a map of the concept of nation states. So in order to move to a spaceship Earth and to have a global game, we have to ultimately, in this century, move away from nation states because all our problems are global. The interesting thing was that right around Earth Day #1 in 1970, the other great thinker who has transformed my life is Marshall McLuhan. And any of you who are in media should know Marshall McLuhan, and if you don't, you've got a wonderful education ahead of you. But he came out with the phrase, there are no passengers on spaceship Earth. Echoing Bucky, we are all crew. So that's what made me start the spaceshipearth.org to create crew consciousness, because you must become crew in order to change what we need to do relative to the climate and practically anything else by the 2030 that the Fork in the Road project is set up, is we have to become crew. So the reference of the 140,000 people have already gone to our website and decided they're going to be crew. So you have to actively crew. And that is committing your life or some part of your life to actually doing the world game. So the other thing, and I have to say it before I turn it over to Gerd, is if there's any questions that Gerd wants to answer, is I'm writing a series of, so this is the book I wrote. And obviously that's the picture I use whenever I talk about the planet we're on, not nation states. This is a book series I'm writing, and the third book of this is called The 2020s, and I'm writing it right now with a dean of design at Syracuse University. It's called The Golden Age of Design and Redesign. And as we look at it, we realize we're gonna have to redesign everything from the industrial age. So it's the legacy thinking. What you see, where you are sitting, when you go out and take a break, what you're seeing is the manifestation of the industrial age, which has got us into this bad situation. So we need to redesign and bring design thinking. Design thinking is the answer. We have to redesign democracy. We have to redesign capitalism. We have to redesign pretty much everything. And we have to do it in this next 10 years from a point of view of climate. If we don't take the 75%, as Gerd said, of energy that comes from fossil fuels down to 30% by 2030, we will not have civilization by 2100. So we really have to do the system. We've coined the phrase PSD, not PTSD, but PSD, planetary systemic design. And that is in a total acknowledgement of our Buckminster Fuller. I urge you all to go to the spaceshipearth.org and go to the forkintheroadproject.com, because you'll get the kind of reading and exposure to the ideas that will help change your consciousness so that you can act with crew consciousness. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just add one thing? Short, I keep it short.
So David, can I just ask you one thing? So this is Anya. Would summing up what you just say, would that be like one world, one nation, one people? That is actually what we should move toward.
I kind of think that one world and one nation is in opposition. In other words, if you're Danish, you're a crew member of Spaceship Earth. The fact that you're from Denmark is secondary. It just happens to be where you are on the spaceship, and I like to use the example like today's Tuesday in Florida. So my trash gets picked up, and the perception is, oh, it's gone away. No, it's just moved to another place in the spaceship. And so the reason I got invited into NASA to speak was because they have the greatest scientists, and they said they weren't moving the needle, but the metaphor of spaceship was something that they could resonate with. So I truly believe that the 21st century is the Earth century. I wrote about that 9 years ago. And it's the century that's the end of the nation state, because the nation states are pretty much time congruent to the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, thank you.
And now I think we should, maybe there are some architects of the future here. So let's hear from some of the young architects of the future. I'll just walk over to you. You come up here, right?
Hello, so my name is Xenia, and I'm a representative of MasterPeace Denmark in close connection to my school, which is the Necessary Teacher Training College. And I was wondering about this, imagining the spaceship Earth and the future and the good future as we're talking about it. And I was wondering, what or is there a role for militarism in this future, and should it be considered? Because I'm worried, as it's still something that is quite prevalent, and I think if there's this concept of one spaceship, why do we need to still put so many resources in militarism? So I was wondering if you have an opinion on that.
Very good question. Yes.
Can I jump on this one?
Yeah, Gert, you go ahead.
Yeah, that's a tough one and a very good question. You know, I think first what's happening is that most of military spending in the next decade will be digital. So we're talking about cybersecurity, AI warfare, genetic engineering, all this sort of grisly stuff, right? But at the same time, I think what we are learning from military is the need to collaborate to solve larger problems. And of course, the military has always been the source of some really amazing innovation as well. Now, the big decision is going to be about taking that money and moving those ideas over to the civilian, the public space, to take advantage of all the momentum that there is in the research labs. Right? And this is a question of policy. I mean, as David said, we are moving towards a world that has to be united. If we don't unite, we will not be there. And I think that's starting to dawn on people now with the COVID crisis, for example. Right? Either we're all going to do well or nobody's going to do well, with very few exceptions. And the same applies to military. So I'm worried about it, but I'm not so worried about it. I think really what's happening is that we're realigning to become sort of, yeah, first the United States of Europe. That's the concept, right? And then maybe kind of a global government, as you have seen in Star Trek and, you know, other science fiction like this. And then the military is just taking the place of taking care of emergencies and taking care of internal security and so on. So I have hope that we can channel this in a better direction. And as I like to say, sometimes the future is better than we tend to think if we look at the present.
Well said. So I was just also thinking that because I like to be Danish, and in this room we have a lot of different nationalities. I haven't even counted how many different nationalities, but it's still fine to keep your own sense of identity, right? And you can collaborate across borders, even knowing where your roots are. So that was like a question I felt like asking. David, you had a...
Sure. It's not that nation states are going to go away. It's that there isn't a major problem facing humanity that isn't, as Gerd just said, global in scope. So it's beyond the capability of the structured nation state mindset to think about we, capital W, capital E, versus us and them. So if you like being Danish, and I like being American, although we're going through a lot of issues these days, that will become kind of my culture, my identity. So the nation state's going to be more about making sure the trains run on time, the garbage gets picked up, protecting the cultural legacy of each country, the cuisines, everything else. So, it's the decision making. You can't have the engine room and the bridge and the sick bay of the nation of the spaceship Earth separate thinking. They have to come to one. So Denmark may be the lead designer for the planet. I don't know, but the point is that it's the decision making for humanity has to go up to a global level through time. We are in the global stage of human evolution. We've gone from family to tribe to village to city state into nation state, and our only issues are planetary. So we have to move to that. I'll still be an American. You'll still be a Dan, but we'll both be crew members.
Yeah, that's very well said. And yeah, let's give him a hand. Yeah. And then just to round up, because I think I have somebody waving the time here, but one of my favorite Bucky quotes that I can't really remember accurately, but it's something about if you want to change something, don't fight the existing, build a new model that will make the old one obsolete. And I think that's what this movement that's growing out of these peace assembly meetings is all about. It's about coming together to build something new that in time, in a very short time, hopefully will make the old systems obsolete. Any final sort of comments, remarks, a very quick round of final remarks? Ragda.
I think that the future is here, right? It's we fail just to notice it sometimes, and then we have the decision to create it into better than we found it. And I think it starts with having an inner peace and working your way out of that into the world. So look at yourself first. Examine that in you, find it, and then help the others to build it into a better world, basically.
I would like to encourage everybody to be extremely imaginative, to imagine a future that could be different than today. So try to imagine cities without cars, where we can spend all the space we currently have roads on for gardens or playgrounds for children or just for leisure. Or try to imagine that teleportation is possible. So you wouldn't have a Japanese restaurant down around the corner. You would actually teleport yourself to Japan if you wanted to eat Japanese food. And think about, would that be a future you would like, or would you actually rather like something else? Maybe teleportation is not the answer to everything, because that also requires energy. But try to be extremely imaginative to think about what could it be like, because in that quest where you go to the extreme, you actually realize what's important. So that's my takeaway for today.
Thank you very much, Anya. Yeah. I actually love the idea of being able to teleport myself anywhere. And then we go to our cyberspace panelists. So maybe if David, what would be your short sort of rounding up remark?
Well, as Gerd keeps saying, the future comes from the present. And the way to look at the now is to look for the opportunity and the new potential, and not to look at the now as it is reported by mainstream media, which always presents the negative. So when Gerd and I project into the future, it's kind of like we look what is an ascendant and what's declining into the now, and then try to help steer it. So I really feel that in this last part of my life, I'm older than the young stud Gerd here, is to make sure that I can do what I can as a futurist to motivate people to go to the good future, to realize the urgency of the fork in the road, to become Spaceship Earth crew members, and to do it today, and to speak loudly and strongly and powerfully as the youth of the world have always done.
Thanks, David.
Sure.
So I'm going to end with a quote from Henry Miller, who said that one's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things. And I think this is so important, especially looking around the room, if I can here, a lot of younger people and people from different places. We have to see things differently, and that requires that we open our eyes. There's an old African saying that if you close your eyes, you will discover the world by accidents. And so we have to open our eyes and pay attention and study the future. 1 hour a day should be spent on studying things that aren't already here. I guarantee you, if you do that, you will find a really great spot in the future, and you'll be very active designing it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gerd. So on that note, a very uplifting note, I think we have to round up this session. We have a ferry sailing from Youth Island at 3:15. You will be in your different parts of the world, logging off in a minute. I just want to say this is a beautiful example how you can have an intergenerational meeting in sort of across different dimensions of reality. And as Ragda said, next year we also go virtual. That's the plan. So we'll have a extra dimension. We move into what's called the spatial web. So see you next year, we hope. Take care. Thanks.